Hey guys, CreepsMcPasta here and welcome to something a little different. There have been many stories I've told since starting this channel, yet since starting, there has been one story I've been holding off telling, until now. My story. And I couldn't think of any way better to celebrate 3 years of narrating on this channel. For the sake of keeping up my anonymity, I'll still refer to myself as Creeps. My story starts in a small town in England with my parents. Now, for a brief summary of them before I was born, is they were both previously married before they married each other and had me. My dad is English and was married, having one kid, a son, but that marriage sadly ended in divorce. His son went with his mother. My mom, being Filipino, was married in the Philippines and had 2 kids, a son and a daughter. Sadly, that marriage ended because her husband was shot and killed. My mum and dad both met through an old-fashioned dating agency of sorts, before the internet was a thing, where they had to send letters to communicate. A primitive time, I know. Eventually, they got married and my mum moved to England with her 2 kids. It's rather a cute story, but maybe one for another time. Anyway, I was born on the 21st of May, but I wasn't alone. You see, I'm actually a twin. Which was not what they were expecting, but they went with it. For this video, I'll refer to him as Pasta. Growing up, my dad did many things. He was primarily a graphics artist of sorts, but did many smaller jobs rather than having one proper job. He called this income streaming, in which he didn't rely solely on one source of income, so if one went down, he always had a backup. He always told this much grander than it actually was because we never really had too much money growing up. I later learned that due to a bad business venture, we were also in a lot of debt. Now me, I was a bit of a clueless kid when I was young. My friends would talk about their games, consoles, systems and toys, and I would sometimes be frustrated that I never had them. It makes sense now looking back, considering we never even had central heating in our house, which I'm pretty sure is illegal now. Anyway, growing up, I ended up playing with a lot of the old toys my parents would get us, and many hand-me-downs from other kids and my older siblings. It was actually pretty cute. Me and my brother would play with our toys, giving them their own backstories, characteristics and stories. I feel this is what sparked my creativity, and being creative is something that really affected my future. Fast forward some years to high school. By this point in life, we were doing better. We weren't by all means rich though, we still couldn't afford the luxuries of life. Being the childish teen I wasn't happy with this either. During the time of high school, the kids would often talk of a market stall in town which sold sweets in bulk for very cheap, much cheaper than the stores did. I ended up managing to use this to my advantage and began buying what I could afford, bringing them to school in Tupperware and selling them individually at a slightly marked up price. This turned out to be my first business venture at the young age of 13, which is another thing which affected my future. Now, this did come with its downfalls. Like with any business, there were customer disputes and the occasional robbery. But I remembered the lessons that period taught me, and with the profits, I bought myself a PS2, which to others is a blasé thing, but to me was huge. Now, I've sometimes been asked, what was I in high school? Was I one of the popular kids? Was I a loser? Etc. And honestly, I'd say I was sort of a malleable mold. I fit in any gap there was. I could sit with the popular kids and get along great with them, and I could also chill with the less popular kids and do the same with them. It was great because for the most part, I was never really alone on breaks. I could find any group and mingle. Looking back, the ride of high school was that of a roller coaster. It had its ups and downs. I honestly don't know why, but I don't remember too much of high school either. It's just one big blur to me. I would go in, do the classes, half pay attention and leave. One life lesson I remember learning in school was problem solving. I remember my desk in math class was touching the teachers. Despite this, I would lay on my desk and often try sleep. I remember one day a kid piped up and said, "Sir, why do you let Creeps sleep in class?" And the teacher responded, "If Creeps wants to fail, he can." Eventually, the tests came around and I was sat looking at the math paper. I didn't know too much about the formulas, but through basic mathematics, I worked out the answers in my own way. I figured I could figure out the answers through my own out-of-the-box methods, and jotted down some working outs that I knew the teachers were looking for. The results came back and, amazingly, I had a perfect score. It was also around this time I discovered a magic new website besides RuneScape and Newgrounds, the internet crack of my generation. No, this site housed silly videos. One was of an Asian guy doing flips and tricks in a mall, the Urban Ninja, and two kids miming along to the Pokemon theme song, some random guys called Smosh. This site was YouTube. I loved browsing this site, and after seeing some film student make a 3-part movie inspired by the Final Fantasy series called The College Saga, I made an account to subscribe to people, and I still have this account from early 2006. But with the highs comes the lows, because I also remember that at this time, my parents fought a lot. I think they thought I couldn't hear them, but I would sometimes be laying awake at night, listening to their bickering, their fighting, and their crying. Come the end of high school, which for us in the UK ends at 16, I finished with pretty much C's all round. And we had an option, either go to college or stay in sixth form, which is basically another 2 years of school. Most of my friends were staying, trying to get their grades for university, so I did too. That year was hectic. I ended up in constant trouble, not doing the work, teachers hating me, and so on. At sixth form, they rated your progress by a 1 to 4 system, 1 being the best, and 4 meaning you really need help. I managed to set a school record by having the first all-round 4s. My friends annoyed one of the student council members by hanging it up in the common room. It was funny at the time, but looking back, it's kind of sad. Inevitably, I ended up dropping out after the first year. I found that I lost contact with pretty much everyone who I hung around with. Turns out most of the relationships I formed were simply because of exposure and no real connection. I only see a very select few from school to this day. Also, remember my twin I mentioned earlier? He ended up staying in sixth form and started the amusing alternate path thing between us. He ended up carrying on and going to university and getting a degree, and I went down the business route, just like in the Game of Life board game. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. This left me at home all day, pretty much playing my Xbox 360 a lot. I would wake up, play games with my friends throughout the day, and go to bed. I ended up signing on job seekers allowance, applying for jobs, not getting them, and playing Xbox. Xbox was the one thing I sunk my time into that I enjoyed. I continued the cycle, all the while worrying my parents. I eventually ended up on a help course called Activate, that was supposed to give people the qualifications needed to get a basic job, which meant basic math and an English GCSE. The thing is, I already had them. My problem was never really overcoming an obstacle or intelligence, but rather direction. I was lost. I felt I had the energy to do something great, but never had something to dedicate my focus. After that course finished, I decided that I too, like my brother, wanted to go to university. I decided I wanted to design games, something which I thought was a good idea at the time. Turns out a lot of people seem to fall onto this. Anyway, because of my debacle with the sixth form incident, I was not qualified to go. So to do this, I'd have to do 2 years of college. So I did the most general course I could, business. During those 2 years, I learnt a lot. Not just about business, but more about myself. I found I never really did want to be a games designer. I just liked the idea of it. And I thought of other possibilities, and after a few months, I would turn off each idea. Eventually I learnt that I was simply not ready for uni, that if I couldn't hold down an interest for more than 3 months, how was I going to do it for 3 years, spending thousands of pounds a year? This threw me through a few loops as I spiraled lower and lower, ultimately wandering amongst the lost generation of my age group. All the while, I would waste my free time playing games and doing generally nothing. Now, at the time, I liked Call of Duty, and I followed a bunch of YouTube shows. But me and my college friend talked a lot about games and stuff, and the current craze? Call of Duty videos. Yes, my shameless confession is that I loved these, and still follow some today. Anyway, we always thought it would be the coolest thing ever to make these videos. We talked about this a lot. At the same time, my Xbox friends and I loved the online show Sanity Not Included, which piqued my interest in amateur voice acting. So, whilst I did my Call of Duty videos, yes, the confessions are coming out now, I started a channel later to try out voice acting. This channel was meant to be a temporary stepping stone to voice acting. It was a channel narrating little online stories called CreepyPastas. I made 2 videos, all the while another YouTuber called Mr. CreepyPasta started his Spring Break Spooktacular, something which has been a reoccurring thing on his channel. During this time, he featured a guest appearance from The Creepy Dark, so I thought, hey, maybe it's a normal thing to be put on his channel. So I messaged him, recorded a story and sent it in. And lo and behold, he put guest performance in the title, so I felt super awkward about that, like I self-imposed myself on his channel. But nonetheless, the feeling of creating content for someone else really got me excited. Many variables and many events bounced around my channel, but I found that through the consistent videos I was making in my spare time, all fueled by my newfound focus and determination, it started to garner interest. Eventually, through more hard work, I finished college with the highest grade possible. I did this whilst getting and maintaining a part-time job and keeping consistent content on YouTube. This was the most satisfying thing I ever did in my life. Some days even ran over 12 hours, yet I still managed to do the whole video making process all by myself. Since college was finished, I found myself with more spare time, but instead of pumping it into games and wasted time, I was sinking more time into video making, all the while slowly learning new skills through self-teaching, experimenting and YouTube tutorials. Eventually, I was getting self-sufficient enough to justify leaving my job. This was a big decision for me, which I had to talk out a lot with my parents, since money for us has always been an iffy issue, but they eventually agreed. Even though I still won't publicly say what it is, I also still ran my own little business in the background as well. Things were finally looking up. I had my new focus in life, something I've never really had before. I was meeting new people, making amazing friends, even impressing my parents, which to me meant everything. This was the top of the roller coaster for me. But sadly, you can't keep going up. Eventually, you're gonna have to come down. After some gritty details I won't get into, my parents finally decided to split. Individually, my parents sat me and my brother down and talked about a lot of details that happened behind the scenes over the years. They told us they were not happy with each other for almost all my life. I heard things like how they really only stayed together for our sake, to basically give me and my brother a fighting chance in life and give us the best upbringing they could, because they thought being brought up by only one parent would set us back. But now that we were adults, and with how high tensions were around the house, they both agreed it was best for them to part ways. Needless to say, a lot of tears were shed. To me and my brother, Pastor, this was devastating. My dad moved away, my brother stayed with my mom, and I disappeared to America for 2 months to get away. Not my brightest moment. When I came back, tensions were still high. Things weren't good. Fast forward some months, and my mom and dad had started talking, and the strangest thing happened. They became friends. These two, who never really had a romantic moment or even a friendly moment for pretty much 2 decades, who, at times, only communicated through shouting and arguing, were having fun talking to each other. By all means, the wounds were not healed, but they found they got along as friends. Occasionally my dad would come around to visit, but we knew he was getting lonely where he was, maybe even borderline depressed, although he would never admit it. So I spitballed the idea of him moving closer to home. It was a crazy idea, but made sense, so in time he moved around the corner and I moved in with him. This was an interesting time in my life. I would frequently go home and visit my mom and brother, but lived around the corner with my dad. Eventually, he would also come with me. Then, a twist I never would have predicted happened. Something I didn't expect at all. They got back together. Yes, that's right. I'm still amazed to this day and I'm super happy for them. And that takes us to this day. A lot has happened throughout my years, although I've had to skim off a lot of details. And what I impressed myself most is, I bet throughout my time on YouTube, you can't pinpoint the times of these events. You see, through all this, I managed to keep up this channel nearly perfectly no matter what, sometimes even over-exceeding at times. I've expanded to 2 full-time channels, something not a lot of people can do. I don't know where it came from, but I have a drive now, a place to finally put all my energy into, and I've been ever since. I'm not joking when I say I put all my time into YouTube 7 days a week, and even now I'm always expanding what I do, always striving to learn new things, never wanting to slow down. I often get messages thanking me for what I've done for them, but I never really get the chance to thank you guys for all you've done for me. Without you, the viewer, the supporter, the fans, I wouldn't have this thing I value so much in life. I don't know what I'd be doing without you, and honestly, that's a thought that scares me. I often get messages of people telling me the position they're in. Sometimes people tell me they're depressed, they feel like a waste, how they won't amount to anything, even suicidal. But I always say, if I offed myself in the lowest point, I wouldn't have ever lived through the highs. You can't just wait around and hope something great happens to you. You have to reach for it yourself. So, if there's something I wanted you to take away from this, it's this. Ask yourself, what do you aspire to be most in life? And what's your next step for getting there?